This is Jamie Drummond for Good Food Revolution. I'm here with David Cover, who's joining us all the way from the bottom of the Brecon Beacons, Penderyn Distillery. How are you today, sir?
I'm very well, thank you very much.
Now, for those people who are unfamiliar with the brand, please tell us a little about the history of this particular Welsh distillery.
Well, Penderyn is really the only single malt Welsh whiskey, and that's something a little bit different and not something that's really been seen before as well in Wales for a very long time. There was a distillery in Wales about 100 years before,
right?
But there hasn't really been anything since, and that was actually in North Wales as well, so a completely different part of the country. And we're kind of reviving that tradition, but there hadn't been a distillery for a very long time.
And why did this Welsh distillation industry disappear?
I think partially it was there was a little bit of a temperance movement, a big temperance movement in North Wales at the time. That was in the late 1800s, early 1900s. So a lot of people didn't like alcohol being sold or made, being distributed. So it made things very difficult for the distillery. They lasted about 13 years, had to shut down in the end. And actually, between them shutting down in 1903, we actually first released our whiskey in 2004.
Okay.
So it was 100 years, almost exactly 100 years, between their last whiskey being produced and our first whiskey being sold.
And how did Penderyn Distillery come about?
Well, we started in the year 2000, and there were just a few circumstances that sort of came together at the right time. You had a still that was already in Wales, a very, very unique type of distillation system, and you had a few people that were able to buy the still that were in that area, and they actually met at the pub one evening to discuss buying the still, building the distillery and everything. They had a building as well that was already owned with a source of water. You've got the still, you've got the water. You don't need a huge amount more than that to produce the whiskey. So I think it was a really it was quite a difficult thing to start off with because they didn't have a huge amount of money, and the idea of making a Welsh whiskey was almost quite laughable at the time. That really the industry was focused on Scotch whiskey, Irish whiskey, American whiskey, and world whiskey wasn't really a thing at that point. And so it was very, very difficult for them, but they went through it, and the whiskey now is very successful and is growing in popularity and is doing really well.
How has the business evolved since those first bottlings?
Well, I think the whiskey was first released in 2004, and from that point it was a very, very small distillery producing very, very little whiskey. We were only making 1 barrel of whiskey a day. It was about 60,000 litres of pure alcohol a year. And then from that point, we started selling a little bit in Wales and then distribution throughout the UK steadily. In 2008 then we built a visitor centre so people could come and visit and do tours and learn about the distillery. And in the last couple of years, as the business has been growing, as we've been getting more successful, we've actually been able to expand the distillery quite a lot as well in the last 5 or 6 years, to be able to make a hell of a lot more whiskey as well. So it's been doing really well. We're actually at the point now where we've pretty much expanded the distillery as much as we possibly can, and we're actually looking at building some new distilleries in Wales as well.
Oh wow!
2 other new distilleries. So that would be something that's really, really exciting.
In your mind, what is it that differentiates the whiskies and the other spirits of Penderyn from the other ones that we find on the global market?
I think what makes Penderyn really successful is the fact that it is so different. It's so different in its style and its taste, the way that it's matured, the way that it's made. So with the whiskies, we're using a very, very unique distillation system. It's called a Faraday still, and it's completely unique in the whiskey world. There's no exact other type of still like it. We've got 2 of those now at the distillery producing, and they make the whiskey not only very pure, it goes up to 90% alcohol. Normally for Scotch whiskey it'd be about 70% when you make spirit coming off the still. Irish whiskey might get to 80%, but 90% is almost unheard of in terms of single malt. So that's something that really creates this different style for our whiskies. They're very light, really, really delicate, even at that point. But then we're using some very different types of casks as well, different barrels to give the whiskey some different flavours as well. So,
what kind of casks would you
Well, the most famous one that we really do is the Madeira finish, which is this one here.
Okay.
And that's really the original, that's the classic style of the whiskey. Madeira barrels really are quite unusual in terms of the whiskey world. People use sherry or port barrels sometimes, but not often Madeira. We also use re-charred barrels, which involves stripping out the inside of the wood and burning it a second time, and that can give you very different flavours of the wood, lots of caramel and toffee, spices, We use peated casks as well, which are barrels that we're actually buying from a distillery called Lefroy, which gives the whiskey a little bit of a smoky flavour, not nearly as much as some of the Scottish whiskies.
Right.
So all of these different things are giving the whiskies all these different variants in flavour. You can definitely find the Penderyn style in all of the bottlings, but they're just going to have slight variances in the flavour from version to version.
If you could describe that Penderyn style, what would that be?
Definitely, it's a very delicate and light style of whiskey, elegant. It's something that's almost underappreciated, I think, in the whiskey world at the moment. People are looking for big. They're looking for big whiskies. They're really bold. They're looking for more oak or more peat or more sweetness or whatever it is. They want the whiskies really dark, or they want them really, really peaty, or whatever it is. And something I feel is quite underappreciated is just this very light and elegant style of whiskey that's quite balanced. I feel like balance is really underappreciated in the whiskey world, where you're not trying to go for these really big brash flavours, but you're trying to find a balance of all these delicate and light flavours, and that's something that's a lot more difficult to do. You can quite easily just overwhelm the whiskey with sweetness or sherry casks or peat or whatever it is, but I think it's a much more difficult thing to find these light and delicate flavours and balance them all out really nicely.
And where have you found your most successful markets to be worldwide?
Well, definitely the UK is our biggest market, always has been.
Really? So domestic
definitely.
markets. Right.
I think something we did quite early on was get the whiskey into some of the supermarkets in the UK, which has been really successful for us and has really spread the brand all around the different parts of the UK. France has been the biggest export for a long time and has really been growing. But recently we've been seeing a lot of success in America as well, in the US.
Okay.
Here in Canada, and Germany as well has been a big market. So the exports at the moment are kind of growing. So.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much for coming to join us at Good Food Revolution today.
No problem at all.
And I look forward to using the Murray method to taste
Absolutely.
these whiskies when I get home this evening.
To show Penderyn at its most enigmatic.
Absolutely.
I would say.
Thank you
Guest
very much.
cameo appearance by Mr. Jim Murray over there. Thanks very much, both of you.
No problem at all.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye for now.